Everyone talks about no contact like it is the move. Go silent. Disappear. Remove your presence entirely and watch what happens. The advice is everywhere, and it is not entirely wrong. Genuine silence, arrived at honestly, does produce real effects in the avoidance interior. The collapse that absence creates, the recognition of what was present, the specific gray of a life from which someone particular has been removed. These are real. But no contact as a strategy misses something fundamental. It locates the power in the absence, in the withholding, in what you are not doing, and building your life around what you are not doing, however temporarily, however strategically, keeps the orientation exactly where it has been all along. The silence that is primarily about its effect on the avoidant is not actually silence. It is a form of continued engagement dressed in the language of withdrawal. It is doing nothing, while intensely thinking about the results of doing nothing. It is organizing your days around the question of what your absence is producing in someone else. That is not freedom. That is the same dynamic with the contact removed. What actually impacts the avoidant more than strategic silence is something that cannot be deployed strategically at all. The thing that cannot be faked, it is a genuinely full life, not the performance of one, not the Instagram version, not the curated appearance of someone who has moved on, not the busyness that fills the hours, while the primary attention remains oriented toward what the avoidant is doing and feeling. An actually full life, one that is genuinely occupied with real work that matters, real relationships that nourish, real forward motion that is not contingent on any particular outcome with the avoidant. This distinction between the performed full life and the genuine one is where most advice about avoidance falls apart, because the advice identifies the correct destination and then offers it as a technique. Become self-sufficient, focus on yourself, build your life. As though these things can be adopted as moves in a relational strategy, they cannot. And the avoidant, whose nervous system has been reading beneath the surface of human presentation since childhood, whose capacity for detecting the difference between genuine and performed is among the most developed available, will feel the difference. A performed full life feels to the avoidance system like managed availability, like someone who is technically not reaching while remaining oriented toward the possibility of reaching. The underlying current is still present. The attention is still located in the question of what the avoidant is doing. The life that appears full is a set constructed over a waiting that has not actually ended. A genuinely full life has a different quality of presence. The person who is actually building something, whose attention is actually invested, whose days have actual content, whose movement forward is genuinely theirs, and not in service of producing a particular effect. That person has a specific quality of aliveness that is immediately distinguishable. And that aliveness, genuine, unmanaged, not for anyone's benefit, is what produces the most significant impact on the avoidance interior. Not the silence. The reality behind the silence. What the avoidance system actually responds to. Throughout every conversation about avoidance psychology, one pattern is consistent. The avoidance system responds to genuineness, not to moves, not to techniques, not to the carefully calibrated application of psychological insight about what their nervous system responds to the real thing, the real self-possession, the real self-direction, the real quality of someone whose life is not organized around the avoidance presence or absence. This is not because the avoidant is uniquely sophisticated or because their system is particularly resistant to strategy. It is because all human beings, at the level of the nervous system's reading of social environments, respond differently to genuine than to performed. The avoidant's specific history has simply sharpened that capacity. What this means, practically, is that the impact you have on the avoidant, the real, lasting, cannot be manufactured impact, comes not from what you do. It comes from who you actually are when you are not thinking about them. That is the impact. The genuine version of you. Living the genuine version of your life with the genuine quality of presence that comes from actually being in your own experience rather than monitoring their response to it. No contact cannot produce this. No contact is about them, what it does to them, what it makes them feel, what it produces in their interior. The thing that actually impacts them is not about them at all. It is simply you being real in your own life. The difference in practice. What does the difference look like in the actual texture of daily life? No contact looks like not texting them, not checking their social media, not reaching out. Maintaining the silence as a practice, often effortful, often requiring active restraint, always organized around the question of whether the restraint is working. The genuinely full life looks like genuinely not thinking about texting them, because you are actually doing something, actually present in the conversation you are having, the work you are completing, the relationship you are investing in. Not because you decided to be present, because the present moment is actually compelling enough that the attention is there naturally. No contact requires maintenance, has good days and bad days, breaks sometimes, and has to be restarted, is measured in how long the silence has been sustained. The genuinely full life does not require maintenance in the same way. It is not a discipline to be upheld. It is simply the natural consequence of having invested genuinely in things that are worth investing in. The presence is not effortful because it is not performed. The impact of no contact is temporary. The avoidance system adjusts to the silence, processes the absence, develops new equilibrium. The specific urgency of your sudden disappearance diminishes as the disappearance becomes the established condition. The impact of a genuinely full life is not temporary in the same way, because it is not a static condition. It is a person who is actually growing, actually changing, actually becoming. The avoidant who encounters you 6 months into genuine self-investment does not encounter the same person they encountered 6 months ago. The development is real. The change is visible. The specific quality of someone who is genuinely in their own life does not diminish with time. It deepens. What this requires that no contact requires restraint, the maintenance of a behavior. This requires something more fundamental and more difficult. It requires genuine investment in your own life, not as a technique, as the actual, daily, this is what I am. Doing commitment to building something that is genuinely yours, work that matters to you, relationships that nourish you, questions you are actually sitting with, things you are actually creating or learning or becoming. This is harder than no contact, because it cannot be measured in days of silence, cannot be tracked or maintained through willpower, cannot be performed for an audience or calibrated to produce a particular effect. It requires the honest answer to an honest question. What do you actually want your life to look like? Not in relation to the avoidant, not contingent on the relationship resolving, not organized around the question of what the avoidant will think of the life you are building. Simply, what do you want? What work engages you genuinely? What relationships sustain you? What questions are you trying to answer? What are you trying to build or create or understand or become? Those questions, answered honestly and then actually lived, that is the thing. The thing that impacts the avoidant more than silence, and more importantly, the thing that makes your life genuinely worth living, regardless of what the avoidant does or does not do. Why? This is also the only honest path. No contact strategy is still organized around the avoidant. The silence is still, at its core, about them, about what the absence produces in them, about whether the withholding will eventually yield the return. That organization, however well disguised, however genuinely accompanied by some real self-investment, keeps the primary question where it has been all along. Will they come back? The genuinely full life, built genuinely, for genuinely your own reasons, eventually produces a different primary question. Not will they come back, but what do I actually want if they do? That shift from hoping for their return to honestly assessing whether the return would serve the life you have built is the real indicator of genuine forward motion, not the duration of the silence, not the number of days without contact, whether the question has genuinely changed. And the question genuinely changes not through no contact, but through genuine investment, through actually building something, through the accumulated daily ordinary experience of a life that is yours, that has content and direction and genuine momentum, that belongs entirely to you. That life is what impacts the avoidant most deeply, because it is real, because it is growing, because it cannot be managed or waited out or processed into equanimity the way a silence can, because the person living it is becoming more themselves, more complete, more genuinely occupied with their own becoming every day, regardless of what the avoidant does. That is the impact, and it is available now, not as a strategy for them, as the only honest way forward for you. Begin it. The genuinely full life has been described. What it is, how it differs from performed self-sufficiency, why it produces real impact rather than strategic effect. What 3,000 more words can honestly do is go deeper into what actually building that life requires. Not as philosophy, but as the concrete, daily, specific enough to be useful reality of what genuine forward motion looks like when the avoidant dynamic has been the primary weather for a significant period. The specific problem with starting most people who have been inside this dynamic for any significant length of time face a specific problem when they try to genuinely invest in their own life. They don't know what they want anymore. Not in the dramatic identity crisis sense, in the quieter, more practical sense of having been oriented towards someone else's interior for long enough that the honest answer to what do I actually want has become genuinely unclear. Because the wanting, the genuine prior to the relationship wanting, got gradually reorganized around the dynamic. What you wanted became entangled with what the relationship needed. Your preferences were calibrated to their capacity. Your direction was shaped, subtly and without explicit decision, by the question of what direction was compatible with maintaining the connection. And now, with the connection in suspension or ended, the question of what you want returns and finds the answer less clear than it was before. This is not pathology. It is the natural consequence of sustained investment in someone else's interior. at the partial expense of your own. But it requires honest acknowledgement that the clarity needs to be rebuilt, not simply accessed. The rebuilding is specific. It does not happen through deciding to want things. It happens through paying attention to what actually produces genuine engagement in you, not what should engage you, not what would look like healthy forward motion from the outside, but what actually, in the specific texture of experience, produces the quality of absorption and interest and aliveness that genuine caring always produces. How to find what is actually there. The honest method is simpler and less impressive than most self-help frameworks suggest. You try things and pay attention to how they actually feel, not how you think they should feel, not how they look from the outside, how they actually feel in the interior, in the specific quality of your engagement, in whether the time spent with something produces genuine absorption, or the performed version of engagement that is really just more sophisticated waiting. This requires a specific quality of honesty that the dynamic may have eroded. The dynamic taught you to calibrate your reported experience to what was receivable, to manage the expression of your actual interior into something less threatening, less demanding, more compatible with the avoidance capacity to receive it. That calibration can extend inward, can produce a version of self-monitoring that filters your own honest experience before you have fully had it. That checks whether what you are feeling is appropriate or excessive or too much, even when there is no audience. Recovering genuine access to your own interior requires gradually uninstalling that filter, allowing the honest response to arrive before the editorial, noticing what you actually think about something before checking whether the thought is reasonable. This is the practice, not glamorous, not the kind of thing that produces visible results quickly, the kind of thing that produces, over months of honest attention, a gradually clearer picture of who you actually are when you are not calibrating yourself for someone else's comfort. The relationships that need investment alongside the work of recovering your own interior, there is the concrete, practical matter of the relationships in your life that have been running at reduced investment. This is worth examining specifically because the avoidant dynamic during its active phase tends to produce a particular distortion in the broader relational landscape. The primary emotional investment goes toward the avoidant. The energy, the attention, the quality of genuine care that you are capable of. A significant portion of this goes into the dynamic, into understanding it, navigating it, hoping for it to shift, which means the other relationships, the friendships, the family connections, the people who are actually consistently present and consistently available, receive the remainder. The maintenance level contact, the social presence that is genuine in its warmth, but is not receiving the full quality of your investment because that quality is allocated elsewhere. Those relationships notice, not always explicitly, not always with words, but in the way that people who care about you register when they are receiving a partial version of your presence. When the conversations are warm, but not quite all the way there. When you are genuinely glad to see them, but not fully in the room. Investing genuinely in these relationships, actually not as a demonstration of moving on, is one of the most concrete and most immediately impactful things available to you right now. Not because it will produce a particular outcome with the avoidant, because these people are actually here, are actually consistent, are actually capable of the reciprocity that the avoidant dynamic was chronically unable to provide, are actually worth the full quality of your presence, which they have not been fully receiving, which you can change, starting with the next conversation. The investment in these relationships will not feel, initially, as electrically significant as the investment in the avoidant dynamic felt. The avoidant dynamic had a charge to it, produced by the uncertainty, by the intermittent reward, by the specific aliveness of never quite knowing. Secure relationships do not have that charge. They have something else. Something that takes longer to recognize as valuable because it is quieter and more consistent and does not produce the neurochemical urgency that the avoidant dynamic produces. The kind that sustains rather than depletes. The kind that over time and with genuine investment produces the specific sustaining warmth of being actually known by people who are actually present. That warmth is not inferior to the charge of the avoidant dynamic. It is simply different. And recognizing the difference, feeling it clearly for what it is, rather than measuring it against the high-stakes intensity of what you are used to, is part of what genuine forward motion requires. The work that is specifically yours beyond relationships, there is the matter of work. Not employment necessarily, work in the broader sense of the things you are making, building, learning, contributing. The dynamic tends to produce a specific relationship to work, one in which the work serves a background function, keeping you occupied, maintaining the forward appearance of a life in motion, while the primary engagement remains elsewhere. The work is done, often done well, but not quite done with the full quality of presence that the work and you are capable of. What would it look like to bring the full quality of your attention to the work, not in service of anything, as the genuine, unmediated investment of someone who is actually here, actually engaged, actually caring about the thing they are doing for its own sake? That investment, when it happens genuinely, produces something that managed engagement does not produce, the experience of time passing without noticing, of being absorbed enough that the background monitoring quiets, not through effort, but through genuine occupation, of ending a period of work and feeling something that is recognizably different from the flat completion of tasks. That experience, the genuine absorption in work that actually matters to you, is one of the most reliable routes to the quality of presence that the unguarded moment consisted of, the one the avoidant fell for. Not because you are trying to recreate it, because genuine absorption produces it naturally. What the avoidant encounters, if they return. If the avoidant returns, having processed the collapse, having arrived at some honest reckoning with what was lost, they will not encounter the person they pushed into silence. They will encounter someone who has been doing genuine work, who has been building genuinely, who has the specific quality of aliveness that genuine investment produces, who is, in concrete and visible ways, different from the person who was waiting for them. Not better in a comparative sense, differently positioned, more fully themselves, more genuinely occupied, more clearly in possession of a life that is actually theirs, and that person genuinely forward-moving, genuinely full, genuinely not organized around the avoidance return is both more attractive to the avoidance system because the person who is built genuinely comes to the question of return with different resources than the person who has been waiting, has the specific grounded quality of someone who knows what they have built and what they will and will not reorganize around someone else's readiness, has standards that were arrived at through genuine self-knowledge rather than stated as an aspiration, has, in the most practical sense, something to protect, not defensively but genuinely. The life that was built has value, has momentum, and that momentum is not available to be simply paused or reversed, because the avoidant has arrived at the reckoning that their silence was supposed to eventually produce. The return, if it comes, enters a life already in motion, and a life already in motion receives the return differently. Not coldly, not with the performed indifference of someone who wants to appear unaffected, with the genuine, clear-eyed, fully informed reception of someone who is actually okay, who is glad to see them perhaps, who still carries the love that refuses to stop, but who is also genuinely, verifiably showed in the texture of their days, okay. That reception, warm and clear-eyed simultaneously, is the only one worth offering, and it is only available genuinely, can only be arrived at through the actual building that produces actual okayness. The plain version of this, forget no contact as a strategy, not because silence is wrong. It is the natural byproduct of someone who is actually somewhere else, who is actually in their own life, who has actually invested enough in their own becoming that the primary question has genuinely shifted. The impact on the avoidant, real, lasting, not manageable, the way a strategic silence is manageable, comes from you being genuinely real, genuinely present in your own life, genuinely building something that belongs to you. That is not a strategy. It is simply living your life. Actually. Completely. Without the reservation of attention towards someone else's interior that the dynamic installed. Their system will register the difference between the silence that was about them and the silence that is simply the natural quiet of someone who is genuinely elsewhere. And whether that noticing produces anything useful for you depends entirely on what they do with it, which is theirs to determine. What is yours is the life, the actual, full, genuinely occupied with its own content life. That was always the point. It still is. Build it. Not for the impact, for the life itself. That is enough.